Great vision is birthed out of reality, not aspiration. You don't begin with a dream. You begin with where you are. This is really, really important, okay? Because too many people, when they craft a vision, they do it based on how they feel, what they want. It's crafted from reality. How are things on the ground, right? Then you can look at what you need to do. Okay. So the very first thing is knowing where you are. Knowing where you are. And I want to give you some areas to look at, right, that will help you figure out what the focus should be. Does this make sense? Okay. So we're going to go through these one by one. First, think about your context. So what's our history and what's our current position? How do we get here? There's no churches in my village. Okay, that's your context. There's no churches in the village. We have one church, it's not very good, or it's a great church, but we really need another church. We're not going to reach everybody. I have a heart for an organization. There's 3 other organizations here, 15 here, but I think I can do it better, right? But what's the current context? That's important. The second thing is core. What do we have? Not what do we want to have, right? My wife and I sometimes play the game, what if we won the lottery? Now, you have to play the lottery to win the lottery. We don't play the lottery. But still, we play the game, what if we won the lottery? First thing we say is, God, think of everything we can do for you. And then we can talk about what we want to do, right? So that's exactly right. But the question is, who do we have? Who's here? When I first was a cross-cultural church planter here in Europe, and we moved into an area, it was just us. But then I looked at the area, for 500,000 people, there were 10 churches, Christian churches, I would say evangelical church, people, believers. So I got to know all 10. I just had to start with where are we? Who do we have? Church Planting 101, who's your first members if you're starting from scratch? You got nobody. You, right? So who do we have? And who holds sway or influence? Because you may be leading an organization or a church. If you come in and you don't know where the influence is or the sway is, you're in trouble. I see this a lot with young pastors who get into churches and they don't realize that there's a key volunteer or a key elder, or sometimes it's in the case of an organization like our organization at Missions Door, it's a key board member or a key staff person. So you need to know that, okay? Who do we have? Who holds sway or influence? Then character. Where do we reflect Christ best? Think of all the characteristics. What do we do best? So some churches or some organizations are really good at knowledge dissemination. Some are really good at creative ideas and engagement. Some have great grace. Some are known to have great love. Some have great compassion. Some are really patient, maybe a little too patient. That's okay, right? So when you think about what do you do best? What characteristics, what fruit of the Spirit really mark who you are? Now, you have children, right? You have children, I have children. Do you have kids or no? Okay, that's okay. Yes. Oh, the third is character. It is your character, and it's also your group's character if you're leading an organization, right? So it's where do we reflect Christ best in our character? And I do want you to think character, and I do want you to think characteristic. That's really important. Okay, think characteristic. All right. If you have kids, I have grandkids, as you saw. You know that not everybody has the same characteristics. I have 3 sons. They're very different children as they were growing up. I got 3 grandchildren. All 3 are very different. And they're known for different characteristics. One's more loving, one's more adventurous. So think about that. Then competencies. What are we naturally good at and why? And I'm talking about skill set. What are we naturally good at? That doesn't mean you're not going to learn anything. I had to learn how to do video editing and website building and all kinds of stuff. But what are you naturally good at? Kind of, right? Or what's your organization naturally good at? Here's why it's important. You're going to leverage that later on. We'll talk about that in a second. Then change. Now, this is the one most people don't pay attention to, and it sometimes is the most important. What's the frequency of change in your organization? Okay. What are they used to? Some places, I'm just so tired of change. When was the last time you changed? Well, 10 years ago, we had a whole, it's a very slow rate of change. If you are moving, I don't have a whiteboard, but if you think about trying to reach innovators or early adopters in your city or your region, you have to have a high rate of change because they love new ideas and pursuing those ideas. So you yourself have to be ahead of them. You've got to create a space where that can happen. If you have a low rate of change, you're going to reach people who are more slow to either do what you're doing or join you with what you're doing. They're just going to be slow and they're going to be harder to convince. Okay? This is moving along really a psychographic, but it's really important as it relates to change, and particularly to mentality. So I'm old enough now that I remember church planting along generational lines. It used to be that, especially in the 80s and 90s, the big thing was, we're going to go plant a church for young families or a church for young people, right? Well, here's your problem. One, young people grow up. Two, if you've ever led a youth group of 13-year-olds, you know not all 13-year-olds are the same. And three, even in those really cool young churches, suddenly some old people start showing up. And what are you going to do? What do you do with that? You're not allowed here. You're 70, go away. It's mentality. It's approach. It's what resonates. So think about that. Now, as you begin to list those out, this will give you a good picture of where you are right now. Okay? And this really is going to help you because from this, you can get to focus and you can begin to get to vision, right? So now you can start to think, okay, now I know where I am. I can think about where I'm going. So let's just take this to going into a brand new area, and we'll use church planting for fun. We can use anything. If you don't like that illustration, I can give another example. When I went into Austria, the context, I knew it was a missionary graveyard. I knew there were very few Christians. I knew it was very hard. I understood the context. I listened to the radio all the time, all the pop songs, to listen to what philosophies were being packaged. Okay. Core, what am I good at? Well, I like music, right? I think I'm pretty good in my characteristic. I'm a pretty positive person, and I love ideas. So my characteristics are that, okay? Then you get to chemistry, right? And chemistry, did I mention chemistry? I didn't. What's our warmth quotient, right? As we function. So how warm am I, right, with other people? I cannot tell you how many awkward leaders I've met. I've met a lot of socially awkward leaders. Right? And if you don't know how you relate to other people, you don't know reality. Why don't I have 1,000 people? Because you're weird. Right? Now that it's not the full stop. God can do anything with anybody. But you should know, am I a warm person? Do I invite people? Do I like having people over for dinner? No, I'll meet you for coffee or dinner, coffee. No, I'll see you when I see you, right? So I knew I was pretty warm. We like having people. We like people in general. Competencies. I had a history in business. I had a history in ministry. I could play music and write music. So we were on the radio in Austria, and I leveraged that. I like sports, so we started sports camps, and I just started to leverage competencies. But what I didn't do was teach engineering. Because I'm not an engineer, right? There's a lot of things I didn't teach horseback riding. The things that we didn't do because of competencies were much longer than the things we could do. Okay, so skill sets, what are we good at? Then we have a pretty comfortable rate of change. But I don't like change that's so fast that my head is dizzy. And I don't like change that's so slow that I'm bored. So I'm probably right around an early adopter to early majority kind of a person. Okay. So if you think of a bell curve, I slant right here. So I know I can create a space to connect over here, but the people I'm going to lead is going to be this way. And then I just looked at statistics in the area. I started to do the breakdown. How many other people do I think live here that have that kind of rate, that think that way? This is reality on the ground. You have to start somewhere, right? So you start there and you go, okay, I've been brutally honest with myself. Okay, that was uncomfortable. But I've now seen what I'm good at, and I've seen what characteristics I can come at this with. By the way, every organization really has a personality. Right? IBM has a very different personality than Mac. Okay? And you need to understand that your church has a personality, your effort, your organization has a personality, your nonprofit, your NGO. And so you need to start thinking about it in those terms. But remember, you're leading it. Okay, you're going to lead it. All right. So now that you know where you are, you can think about where to go next. Okay, that's it. Think about where to go next. So how do I do that? Well, before I can do that, I need to realize next is not about me and what I want to do. Next is about what's best for the context. Okay? A lot of people, when they craft vision, especially leaders tend to think, well, what do I want to do? And that's only okay as long as it serves the context. Right? Otherwise, it's ego-driven, and you're going to find yourself frustrated at the effort. Let me give you an example. So I had a pastor once come to me, and he goes, I just have a heart for prison ministry. So I have told our church, we are going to do prison ministry. Our whole church is going to do prison ministry. And I'm telling you, this is what God wants. There wasn't a prison around for 30 miles. So God had broken his heart for prisoners, and the challenge was he was leading people. That's not their context. So my response was, you should move 30 miles and do prison ministry. Bring in a leader to lead them for their context. There's a big difference here. And sometimes your passion isn't going to be their passion. And you can see it. You're like, we'll have choirs and bands, and it'll be like so cool and whatever it is. But it's not about you, right? So, when we see where God is calling, let me give you 3 tips on that. And then I want to give you some examples. The first tip, bring out the best. So when you're trying to see where God is calling me, bring out the best. What is the best of what we're doing? Begin by focusing on what makes you uniquely great. Okay? Your uniqueness is a superpower. So focus on that. Understand it's a process. That's my second tip. You're going to factor in time. It's a process. And the third is a process to get to the vision, to get buy-in. It's a process because you're leading other people towards it, not just yourself. And the third thing is you need to have some perspective. Remember, it's not about the final step. It's about the next step. Okay? Not the final step, the next step. So let me give you some examples. I was doing some consulting with a church. They didn't have any vision at all. I said, well, what are you about? We don't know. We just want to reach people for Jesus. Okay, what makes you great? Wow. So we went through this whole process. And at the end of it, they realized we shouldn't have a multi-year vision. We need a vision for just this next year. And the vision they came up with was defined. What does that mean? Well, they had 4 quarterly focuses. First, we're going to take who we are. That's going to be quarter 1. And all of our newsletters, everything's going to talk about who we are. The second, we're going to talk about whose we are. We belong to Jesus. Okay, let's get this all under alignment. The third quarter, we're going to talk about why that matters, who we are and who he is. And the fourth quarter, we're finally going to get to where to begin. What that did for their congregation was it gave their congregation that structure, right? It gave them that structure, okay? It gave their elders structure, but it also started to create their culture. They knew which tools to leverage because they knew what their emphasis were going to be. When I first came to Grace Point as a lead multi-site pastor, this is before I was president of Missions Door, the church was 50 years old, was wounded, was broken, and was bleeding. And it was up and down. And about half the church was ready to go. And they called me to be their pastor. And I said, you don't want me. You go get a sacrificial lamb. That's not what I do. And they're like, no, really, we need you. I said, okay. God called. I said, okay, God. So I went through the process, and I said, God gave me a 3-year vision. Okay, birthed out of reality. What's the first thing we had to do? Stabilize. We had to stabilize the ship. So I told, you have to extrovert the reality. Call it out as a leader. So I stood up and I said, all right, this year we're going to work on being steady. This is the year of stabilization. And I had quarterly emphases. Here's how we're going to do it. right? Boom, boom, boom. We're going to nail down who we are. We didn't have any core values. We're going to get to that. And so we stabilized. The next year was all about solidify. Why? Solidify was about pressing in on our systems to see where we were broken. So I wanted to consolidate things like, all right, talk to me about follow-up for visitors. Talk to me about how do we share the gospel? Who's sharing the gospel? Where do they go for a new members class? All of that stuff. And they had systems in place, but when you put stress on it, turns out we found some broken systems. And so we just said, well, this year we're solidifying, so let's fix them. And then the third year was we're going to stretch. And for that year, I was going to push the congregation. And I would tell them, I telegraphed it 3 years out. I said, this year we have 3-year vision. This year we're working on this. This year we're working on this. Get ready. Here comes the stretch year. And in the stretch year, I laid down 4 challenges that I knew was going to stretch them to share their faith personally, that was going to stretch them for giving, that was going to stretch them to see what was going to happen. That was important for me as a leader because I needed to figure out how athletic we were as an organization. Athletic, how fit we were as an organization, as a church. And as it turns out, we were fit in every area but one. Right? By this time, I had 3 years. We'd worked on our music, which stunk, but we got it stabilized, right? We started to build systems. And then what happened was we ran this stretch year and we hit 2 markers and we failed at 2 markers. And the 2 markers, the big failure was people weren't sharing their faith personally. They were inviting them to church, but they weren't sharing their faith. And the second one was we had a building campaign for really, we wanted to add on the foyer. We didn't hit the goal, so we wound up doing a renovation instead. But I got up at the end of the year and I just said, okay, here's what we said. Here was the goal. We failed here. We succeeded here. So I was reflecting back. Here's where we're at in the journey. Now what happens? Well, by the next year, they're like, what's the vision? What's the next vision? And I'm praying and I'm walking and looking at reality. And I realized we had spent 3 years being intense. And we needed a year of delight where we just had humor. We were joyful. We were laughing. Here's how we addressed some of that. I had people tell jokes on stage. We had games as they were coming in, like Connect 4. We got an adult-sized Connect 4 as people coming. And I said it, look, it was so healthy for us because you have tension and release. We had all this tension. Now we released and it was like, okay, let's go and do this thing. And then we launched into a 4-year vision, okay? All with measurable things. So there's so many different ways and different tacks you can take on this, but it's really important. You'll notice in this, what am I doing? I'm bringing out the congregation's best. I'm seeing what's possible, but I started it all from reality, all of it, so that we could get where God was calling us to go. Same thing with Missions Door. Missions Door, 75-year organization, incredible predecessor, had been there for 40-something years. I started in January, but it's a bunch of missionaries, and the history of Missions Door was a lot of cats doing their own thing. So what do? I immediately talk about what unites us. In newsletters, here's our core values, here's how to make our vision and mission sticky so everybody can remember it, because nobody could remember them, right? Starting from that reality was important to start shaping the culture and shaping the direction. And that's just, so this year, we're about to celebrate 75 years in 3 weeks. Everybody in the organization globally, they'll say, what are you praying for the president for? And they'll all tell you, clarity and continuity. Now guess what words aren't there? Change, create, right? Just clarity. We're doing great things, we're just not clear on them. And continuity. What was started before, we're going to continue. Here's how. Okay? Important as we kind of move forward and shape culture. So, bring out the best. Understand it's a process. I had it. It was cool. It was like a theme, but it's not a theme. It's a vision. And here we go. We're taking the next steps. Why aren't they as excited as I am? It's week 2. Because it takes time. Okay? And then understand, have some perspective. Okay? It's not the final step. It's the next step. All right. Rick Warren said, I cannot ask other people to believe God for me. I have to set the pace in terms of vision in terms of dreams, in terms of faith, in terms of what God wants to do in our lives and in our congregation. You cannot delegate faith in God. So often, I will talk to leaders of churches and organizations, and they'll say, we want a vision. We're going to have a meeting, and collectively, we're all going to come up with a vision. No, you're not. You'll talk about reality, but no, you're not. The leader needs to be a part of that. So you can take a team through it and lead your team through it. That's healthy. But the leader has to believe. The leader has to go, I think I see a way through. They have to do their hard work. So what I'm saying is, if you're looking for a vision for your organization, your effort, whatever it is, you cannot give that to someone else to find out for you. You have to go through the process. Make sense? All right, now I want to talk about 3 components of creating vision. The first is crafting the cultural architecture. I think it was Peter Drucker who famously said, you know the Drucker quote? Anyone? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. The culture of your church matters much more than your strategy. Okay? So you have to become a cultural architect, okay, of your organization. So the question is, how do I do that? Right? Well, the first thing is values. Values. What do we currently value and what do we long to value? Right? And are our values clear, concise, and memorable? Do our values inspire? First you choose your values, then your values shape you, right? Missions Door, we have 4 values. They were there before I got there. No one could name them. But they were brilliant values, really good. So I didn't change them. I just made them portable, right? So I said, we're better together. There's a value. Multi-ethnic focus, got it. Love changes everything. Oh, gospel reconciliation, got it. Leaders serve first. Got it, right? So I began to kind of put these portability to the values they had because they had values, they just weren't clear and concise. So you need to think about values. Does my church have values? Does my organization have values? That's going to be your peach pit. Your vision, your ongoing vision, your mission, your ongoing vision, mission, and your values. If you think of an organization, some organizations are like coconuts, some organizations are like peaches, right? Someone describe a coconut. How would you describe a coconut? Hard on the outside. Prickly? Prickly, right? Rough. Difficult to break into? Yeah, really hard to break into, right? Once you get into the inside, is there anything there? What's there? Juice, so not much. You're not getting more meat. You just break in and, oh, this was it? I beat my brains out for this, right? Some organizations are like coconuts culturally. They beat their brains out to be a part of it, and you get in and you go, is this all there is to it? Churches as well, right? I want to belong. 15 years, I'm finally here, I belong. Good to see you. Is this what you'd hope for? Oh, this was it. You want to be a peach. Peach is fuzzy on the outside. It's got a sweet juice in the middle, right? This great, like, cultural, organizational warmth, and people are talking to each other, and it's sweet and good. And there's a peach pit that you'll break your teeth on, right? This is your peach pit, your values, your vision, and your mission, right? You really want to make sure that's hardcore. Good. How else do I craft culture? Well, you are what you celebrate and what you don't celebrate. What you say is important and what you don't say is important. I'll give you an example. How many of you would say you're from a welcoming church? Our church is so friendly. We're so welcoming, right? Okay. So, and we're such a welcoming church. The question is, how often do you tell stories about people welcoming each other? How often do you tell stories about people welcoming each other? How do you celebrate welcomeness? Right? So Remember what you celebrate and what you don't celebrate. By the way, this is true of your families too. We ran this experiment on our kids. So we had core values and everything. And it turns out it actually works. The climate that you're in, what you choose to extrovert, and what you don't say. You know, if a leader has another leader under them who's actually a bad leader, but the leader doesn't want to do anything, and so that bad leader just stays in that position, it will ultimately wreck your culture, right? Because you're not doing anything and it's existing. So non-action is action. So it's important to be very deliberate about that. Another way, stories are a leadership responsibility. And then structure and empowerment. Those would be some other areas I would look at for culture